হ্যালো এভরিওয়ান, সবাই কেমন আছেন? আশা করছি সবাই ভালোই আছেন। তো আমরা আমাদের আইএলটিএস লিসেনিং এর একদম শেষ পর্যায়ে চলে এসেছি অ্যান্ড আমরা মোটামুটি আইএলটিএস লিসেনিং এর যাবতীয় সকল বিষয় কভার করে এসেছি। সো ইন দিস ভিডিও হোয়াট উইল ডু ইজ আমরা এক্ষেত্রে বিভিন্ন প্রকার প্র্যাকটিস করব, অর্থাৎ রিয়েল প্র্যাকটিস করব ফ্রম কেমব্রিজ আইএলটিএস বুক। তো এই ক্ষেত্রে যে বিষয়টা ইম্পর্টেন্ট সেটা হচ্ছে আপনারা যদি পূর্বের ভিডিওগুলো না দেখে থাকেন তাহলে পূর্বের ভিডিওগুলো আগে দেখে নেন, কারণ হচ্ছে এটা মূলত লেসন না, এই ভিডিওটা মূলত হচ্ছে বা এই ক্লাসটা মূলত হচ্ছে প্র্যাকটিস সেশন। সো ইটস নট এনি ক্লাস, জাস্ট আপনি যে প্রিভিয়াস ভিডিওগুলোতে বা প্রিভিয়াস লেকচারগুলোতে যত কিছু শিখছেন সেইটারই ফলাফল পাওয়া যাবে এই এই লেকচারটাতে। আই মিন আজকের প্র্যাকটিস সেশনে যে আপনি কতটা আয়ত্ত করতে পারছেন। সো আমার রিকোয়েস্ট থাকবে হচ্ছে আপনারা যদি আগের ভিডিওগুলো ঠিকভাবে না দেখে থাকেন তাহলে আগের ভিডিওগুলো এট ফার্স্ট খুব ভালোভাবে দেখে নিন, so that you have a clear idea of IELTS listening and everything about IELTS listening. So let's start. একটা কথা আমি সবসময় পূর্বেও বলছি যে প্র্যাকটিস প্র্যাকটিস প্র্যাকটিস, সব কিছুতেই প্র্যাকটিসটা অত্যাধিক গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। ওকে, অ্যান্ড আজকে আমরা যে প্র্যাকটিসগুলো করবো সেটা হচ্ছে কেমব্রিজ আইএলটিএস বুক 11 থেকে। অ্যান্ড আমরা এট ফার্স্ট অডিওটা প্লে করবো সেকশন ওয়াইজ, দেন অ্যান্সারগুলো মেলানোর ট্রাই করব। তো আমরা প্রথমে দেখবো হচ্ছে কেমব্রিজ আইএলটিএস 11 বইয়ের টেস্ট নাম্বার 3। সো এটা একদম একটা রিয়েল টেস্টের মতো, আপনি রিয়েল টেস্টের মতো সিরিয়াসলি এই টেস্টটাতে অংশগ্রহণ করবেন, মানে হচ্ছে ইটস লাইক এ রিয়েল টেস্ট। সো প্লিজ বি সিরিয়াস অ্যাবাউট ইট and try to do your best to solve all the answers so that they are correct. Alright, so let's start. তো যদি আপনারা খাতা কলম না নিয়ে বসে থাকেন, সো খাতা কলম নিয়ে বসে পড়েন অ্যান্ড শুরু হয়ে যাক। সো আমি অডিওটা প্লে করতেছি এখন, অ্যান্ড আপনারাও সাথে সাথে খাতা কলমে লেখা শুরু করবেন, নোট ডাউন করা শুরু করবেন অ্যান্সারগুলো। তারপর আপনার টোটাল টেস্ট শেষে অ্যান্সারগুলো মিলিয়ে নেবেন।
Section 1. You will hear a woman telephoning a tourist office to ask about free activities. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 6.
তো এই যে সময়টা দিচ্ছে, এই সময়টাতে আপনারা যেটা করবেন সেটা হচ্ছে 1 to 6 এই কোয়েশ্চেনগুলো দেখে ফেলেন অ্যান্ড আপনি কিওয়ার্ডগুলো নোট ডাউন করার
You
ট্রাই
will
করেন
see
অ্যান্ড
that
রিজিউম
there is
করার
an
ট্রাই করেন।
example that has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
Good morning, this is Burnham Tourist Office, Martin speaking.
Oh, hello. I saw a poster about free things to do in the area, and it said people should phone you for information. I'm coming to Burnham with my husband and 2 children for a few days on June the 27th, or possibly the 28th, and I'd like some ideas for things to do on the 29th.
Yes, of course.
The date that the woman wants information about is the 29th of June, so the letter C has been circled. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Good morning, this is Burnham Tourist Office, Martin speaking.
Oh, hello. I saw a poster about free things to do in the area, and it said people should phone you for information. I'm coming to Burnham with my husband and 2 children for a few days on June the 27th, or possibly the 28th, and I'd like some ideas for things to do on the 29th.
Yes, of course. OK. Then let's start with a couple of events especially for children. The art gallery is holding an event called Family Welcome that day, when there are activities and trails to use throughout the gallery.
That sounds interesting. What time does it start?
The gallery opens at 10 and the Family Welcome event runs from 10:30 until 2 o'clock. The gallery stays open until 5, and several times during the day they're going to show a short film that the gallery has produced. It demonstrates how ceramics are made, and there'll be equipment and materials for children to have a go themselves. Last time they ran the event, there was a film about painting, which went down very well with the children, and they're now working on one about sculpture.
I like the sound of that. And what other events happen in Burnham?
Well, do you all enjoy listening to music?
Oh, yes.
Well, there are several free concerts taking place at different times, 1 or 2 in the morning, the majority at lunchtime and a couple in the evening, and they range from pop music to Latin American.
The Latin American could be fun. What time is that?
It's being repeated several times in different places. They're performing in the Central Library at 1 o'clock, then at 4 it's in the City Museum, and in the evening at 7:30 there's a longer concert in the theatre.
Right. I'll suggest that to the rest of the family.
Something else you might be interested in is the boat race along the river.
Oh, yes. Do tell me about that.
The race starts at Offord Marina to the north of Burnham and goes as far as Summer Pool. The best place to watch it from is Charlesworth Bridge, though that does get rather crowded.
And who's taking part?
Well, local boat clubs, but the standard is very high. One of them came first in the West of England Regional Championship in May this year. It was the first time a team from Burnham has won. It means that next year they'll be representing the region in the National Championship.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 7 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 7 to 10.
Now, I've heard something about Paxton Nature Reserve. It's a good place for spotting unusual birds, isn't it?
That's right, throughout the year. There is a lake there as well as a river, and they provide a very attractive habitat. So it's a good idea to bring binoculars if you have them. And just at the moment you can see various flowers that are pretty unusual. The soil at Paxton isn't very common. They're looking good right now.
Right. My husband will be particularly interested in that.
And there's going to be a talk and slideshow about mushrooms, and you'll be able to go out and pick some afterwards and study the different varieties.
Uh-huh. And is it possible for children to swim in the river?
Yes, part of it has been fenced off to make it safe for children to swim in. It's very shallow and there's a lifeguard on duty whenever it's open. The lake is too deep, so swimming isn't allowed there.
OK, we must remember to bring their swimming things in case we go to Paxton. How long does it take to get there by car from Burnham?
About 20 minutes, but parking is very limited, so it's usually much easier to go by bus. And it takes about the same time.
Right. Well, I'll discuss the options with the rest of the family. Thanks very much for all your help.
You're welcome.
Goodbye.
Bye.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
সো সেকশন 1 শেষ হলো অ্যান্ড হোপফুলি আপনারা আপনাদের পেপারে সবগুলো অ্যান্সার নোট ডাউন করে নিয়েছেন অ্যান্ড এই 30 সেকেন্ডসে আপনারা একটু অ্যান্সারগুলো মিলিয়ে নিন। এখন আমরা যাব হচ্ছে সেকশন 2।
Now turn to Section 2. Section 2. You will hear a talk given by a woman called Shona Ferguson about changes in a town called Barford. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
First of all, let me thank you all for coming to this public meeting to discuss the future of our town. Our first speaker is Shona Ferguson from Barford Town Council. Shona.
Thank you. First, I'll briefly give you some background information. Then I'll be asking you for your comments on developments in the town. Well, as you don't need me to tell you, Barford has changed a great deal in the last 50 years. These are some of the main changes. 50 years ago, buses linked virtually every part of the town and the neighbouring towns and villages. Most people used them frequently, but not now, because the bus companies concentrate on just the routes that attract most passengers. So parts of the town are no longer served by buses. Even replacing old, uncomfortable buses with smart new ones has had little impact on passenger numbers. It's sometimes said that bus fares are too high, but in relation to average incomes, fares are not much higher than they were 50 years ago. Changes in the road network are affecting the town. The centre was recently closed to traffic on a trial basis, making it much safer for pedestrians. The impact of this is being measured. The new cycle paths separating bikes from cars in most main roads are being used far more than was expected, reducing traffic and improving air quality. And although the council's attempts to have a bypass constructed have failed, we haven't given up hope of persuading the government to change its mind. Shopping in the town centre has changed over the years. Many of us can remember when the town was crowded with people going shopping. Numbers have been falling for several years, despite efforts to attract shoppers, for instance by opening new car parks. Some people combine shopping with visits to the town's restaurants and cafes. Most shops are small, independent stores, which is good, but many people prefer to use supermarkets and department stores in nearby large towns, as there are so few well-known chain stores here. Turning now to medical facilities. The town is served by family doctors in several medical practices, fewer than 50 years ago, but each catering for far more patients. Our hospital closed 15 years ago, which means journeys to other towns are unavoidable. On the other hand, there are more dentists than there used to be. Employment patterns have changed along with almost everything else. The number of schools and colleges has increased, making that the main employment sector. Services such as website design and accountancy have grown in importance, and surprisingly perhaps, manufacturing hasn't seen the decline that has affected it in other parts of the country.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Now I'll very quickly outline current plans for some of the town's facilities, before asking for your comments. As you'll know if you regularly use the car park at the railway station, it's usually full. The railway company applied for permission to replace it with a multi-storey car park, but that was refused. Instead, the company has bought some adjoining land, and this will be used to increase the number of parking spaces. The Grand, the old cinema in the High Street, will close at the end of the year and reopen on a different site. You've probably seen the building under construction. The plan is to have 3 screens with fewer seats rather than just the one large auditorium in the old cinema. I expect many of you shop in the indoor market. It's become more and more shabby looking, and because of fears about safety, it was threatened with demolition. The good news is that it will close for 6 weeks to be made safe and redecorated, and the improved building will open in July. Lots of people use the library, including school and college students who go there to study. The council has managed to secure funding to keep the library open later into the evening, twice a week. We would like to enlarge the building in the not-too-distant future, but this is by no means definite. There's no limit on access to the nature reserve on the edge of town, and this will continue to be the case. What will change, though, is that the council will no longer be in charge of the area. Instead, it will become the responsibility of a national body that administers most nature reserves in the country. OK, now let me ask you if...
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 3. Section 3. You will hear 2 students called Helen and Jeremy, who are studying creative writing, discussing a project for their course which involves writing and illustrating stories for children. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Hello, Helen. Sorry I'm late.
Hi, Jeremy, no problem. Well, we'd better work out where we are on our project, I suppose.
Yeah, I've looked at the drawings you've done for my story, The Forest, and I think they're brilliant. They really create the atmosphere I had in mind when I was writing it.
Oh, I'm glad you like them.
There are just a few suggestions I'd like to make.
Go ahead.
Now, I'm not sure about the drawing of the cave. It's got trees all around it, which is great, but the drawing's a bit too static, isn't it? I think it needs some action.
Yes, there's nothing happening. Perhaps I should add the boy, Malcolm, isn't it? He would be walking up to it.
Yes, let's have Malcolm in the drawing. And what about putting in a tiger? The one that he makes friends with a bit later. Maybe it could be sitting under a tree, washing itself.
And the tiger stops in the middle of what it's doing when it sees Malcolm walking past.
That's a good idea.
OK, I'll have a go at that.
Then there's the drawing of the crowd of men and women dancing. They're just outside the forest, and there's a lot going on.
That's right. You wanted them to be watching a carnival procession, but I thought it would be too crowded. Do you think it works like this?
Yes, I like what you've done. The only thing is, could you add Malcolm to it without changing what's already there?
What about having him sitting on the tree trunk on the right of the picture?
Yes, that would be fine.
And do you want him watching the other people?
No, he's been left out of all the fun, so I'd like him to be crying. That'll contrast nicely with the next picture where he's laughing at the clowns in the carnival.
Right, I'll do that.
And then the drawing of the people ice skating in the forest.
I wasn't too happy with that one. Because they're supposed to be skating on grass, aren't they?
That's right, and it's frozen over. At the moment, it doesn't look quite right.
I see what you mean. I'll have another go at that.
And I like the wool hats they're wearing. Maybe you could give each of them a scarf as well?
Yeah, that's easy enough. They can be streaming out behind the people to suggest they're skating really fast.
Great. Well, that's all on the drawings.
Right. So you finish writing your story, and I just need to finish illustrating it, and my story and your drawings are done.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
So the next thing is to decide what exactly we need to write about in the report that goes with the stories, and how we're going to divide the work.
Right, Helen.
What do you think about including a section on how we planned the project as a whole, Jeremy? That's probably quite important.
Yeah, well, you've had most of the good ideas so far. How do you feel about drafting something? Then we can go through it together and discuss it.
Okay, that seems reasonable. And I could include something on how we came up with the ideas for our two stories, couldn't I?
Well, I've started writing something about that, so why don't you do the same and we can include the two things?
Right. So what about our interpretation of the stories? Do we need to write about what we think they show, like the value of helping other people or that sort of thing?
That's going to come up later, isn't it? I think everyone in the class is going to read each other's stories and come up with their own interpretations, which we're going to discuss.
Oh, I missed that. So it isn't going to be part of the report at all?
No. But we need to write about the illustrations because they're an essential element of children's experience of reading the stories. It's probably easiest for you to write that section, as you know more about drawing than I do.
Maybe, but I find it quite hard to write about. I'd be happier if you did it.
Okay. So when do you think we can get this?
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 4. Section 4. You will hear part of a lecture to business students about the use of one particular type of research known as ethnography. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
So, what I'm going to talk about to you today is something called ethnography. This is a type of research aimed at exploring the way human cultures work. It was first developed for use in anthropology, and it's also been used in sociology and communication studies. So, what's it got to do with business, you may ask? Well, businesses are finding that ethnography can offer them deeper insight into the possible needs of customers, either present or future, as well as providing valuable information about their attitudes towards existing products. And ethnography can also help companies to design new products or services that customers really want. Let's look at some examples of how ethnographic research works in business. One team of researchers did a project for a company manufacturing kitchen equipment. They watched how cooks used measuring cups to measure out things like sugar and flour. They saw that the cooks had to check and recheck the contents because although the measuring cups had numbers inside them, the cooks couldn't see these easily. So a new design of cup was developed to overcome this problem, and it was a top seller. Another team of ethnographic researchers looked at how cell phones were used in Uganda, in Africa. They found that people who didn't have their own phones could pay to use the phones of local entrepreneurs. Because these customers paid in advance for their calls, they were eager to know how much time they'd spent on the call so far. So the phone company designed phones for use globally with this added feature. Ethnographic research has also been carried out in computer companies. In one company, IT systems administrators were observed for several weeks. It was found that a large amount of their work involved communicating with colleagues in order to solve problems, but that they didn't have a standard way of exchanging information from spreadsheets and so on. So, the team came up with an idea for software that would help them to do this. In another piece of research, a team observed and talked to nurses working in hospitals. This led to the recognition that the nurses needed to access the computer records of their patients no matter where they were. This led to the development of a portable computer tablet that allowed the nurses to check records in locations throughout the hospital. Occasionally, research can be done even in environments where the researchers can't be present. For example, in one project done for an airline, respondents used their smartphones to record information during airline trips, in a study aiming at tracking the emotions of passengers during a flight. So, what makes studies like these different from ordinary research? Let's look at some of the general principles behind ethnographic research in business. First of all, the researcher has to be completely open-minded. He or she hasn't thought up a hypothesis to be tested, as is the case in other types of research. Instead, they wait for the participants in the research to inform them. As far as choosing the participants themselves is concerned, that's not really all that different from ordinary research. The criteria according to which the participants are chosen may be something as simple as the age bracket they fall into, or the researchers may select them according to their income, or they might try to find a set of people who all use a particular product, for example. But it's absolutely crucial to recruit the right people as participants. As well as the criteria I've mentioned, they have to be comfortable talking about themselves and being watched as they go about their activities. Actually, most researchers say that people open up pretty easily, maybe because they're often in their own home or workplace. So, what makes this type of research special is that it's not just a matter of sending a questionnaire to the participants. Instead, the research is usually based on first-hand observation of what they are doing at the time. But that doesn't mean that the researcher never talks to the participants. However, unlike in traditional research, in this case, it's the participant rather than the researchers who decides what direction the interview will follow. This means that there's less likelihood of the researcher imposing his or her own ideas on the participant. But after they've said goodbye to their participants and got back to their office, the researcher's work isn't finished. Most researchers estimate that 70 to 80% of their time is spent not on the collecting of data, but on its analysis, looking at photos, listening to recordings and transcribing them, and so on. The researchers may end up with hundreds of pages of notes. And to determine what's significant, they don't focus on the sensational things or the unusual things. Instead, they try to identify a pattern of some sort in all this data and to discern the meaning behind it. This can result in some compelling insights that can, in turn, feed back to the whole design process.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Please stop writing and wait for your question booklet to be collected.
সো লিসেনিং সেকশনটা কমপ্লিটলি শেষ হলো। এখন 10 মিনিট টাইম দেওয়া হয়ে থাকে, ওই 10 মিনিটে অ্যান্সারগুলো অ্যান্সার শিটে ট্রান্সফার করে নিতে হবে। তো আশা করছি আপনারা খুব ভালোভাবেই এই টোটাল যে টেস্টটা সেটা কমপ্লিট করছেন।
Now turn to section 4.
এখন যেটা সেটা হচ্ছে অলরাইট, থ্যাংক ইউ এভরিওয়ান অ্যান্ড ওয়েল ডান। সো এখন আপনারা আপনাদের অ্যান্সারের সাথে এই অ্যান্সারগুলো মিলিয়ে নিন। অ্যান্ড আমি 1 মিনিট সময় দিলাম এই জন্য যে আপনারা আপনাদের অ্যান্সারগুলোর সাথে মিলিয়ে নেন অ্যান্সারগুলো, অ্যান্ড দেন কাউন্ট করেন যে কতগুলো অ্যান্সার সঠিক হয়েছে। সো I'll give you on average 2 minutes for that. So it's finished. Now please check your band score and please comment me. So I hope you all did very well and congratulations. Now we will move to our second test, and that is test 4 of the Cambridge IELTS book 11. Again, solve it like a real test. Let's start.
Section 1. You will hear a woman telephoning for information about a festival. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 7. You will see that there is an example that has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be played first.
Good morning, Stretton Festival box office. How can I help you?
Oh, hello. My family and I are on holiday in the area, and we've seen some posters about the festival this week. Could you tell me about some of the events, please?
Of course.
First of all, are there still tickets available for the jazz band on Saturday?
There are, but only £15. The £12 seats have all been sold.
The man says that tickets are available for £15, so 15 has been written in the space. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 7.
Good morning, Stretton Festival box office. How can I help you?
Oh, hello. My family and I are on holiday in the area, and we've seen some posters about the festival this week. Could you tell me about some of the events, please?
Of course.
First of all, are there still tickets available for the jazz band on Saturday?
There are, but only £15. The £12 seats have all been sold.
OK, and the venue is the school, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. The secondary school. Make sure you don't go to the primary school by mistake. And there's an additional performer who isn't mentioned on the posters. Carolyn Hart is going to play with the band.
Oh, I think I've heard her on the radio. Doesn't she play the oboe or flute or something?
Yes, the flute. She usually plays with symphony orchestras, and apparently this is her first time with a jazz band.
Well, I'd certainly like to hear her. Then the next thing I want to ask about is the duck races. I saw a poster beside a river. What are they exactly?
Well, you buy a yellow plastic duck, or as many as you like. They're £1 each. And you write your name on each one. There'll be several races, depending on the number of ducks taking part. And John Stevens, a champion swimmer who lives locally, is going to start the races. All the ducks will be launched into the river at the back of the cinema. Then they'll float along the river for 500 metres, as far as the railway bridge.
And are there any prizes?
Yes. The first duck in each race to arrive at the finishing line wins its owner free tickets for the concert on the last night of the festival.
You said you can buy a duck. I'm sure my children will both want one.
They're on sale at a stall in the market. You can't miss it. It's got an enormous sign showing a couple of ducks.
OK, I'll go there this afternoon. I remember walking past there yesterday. Now, could you tell me something about the flower show, please?
Well, admission is free, and the show is being held in Bythwaite Hall.
Sorry, how do you spell that?
Bythwaite. Bythwaite.
Is it easy to find? I'm not very familiar with the town yet.
Oh, you won't have any problem. It's right in the centre of Stretton. It's the only old building in the town, so it's easy to recognise.
I know it. I presume it's open all day.
Yes, but if you'd like to see the prizes being awarded for the best flowers, you'll need to be there at 5 o'clock. The prizes are being given by a famous actor, Kevin Shapless. He lives nearby and gets involved in a lot of community events.
Gosh, I've seen him on TV. I'll definitely go to the prize giving.
Right.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 8 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 8 to 10.
I've seen a list of plays that are being performed this week, and I'd like to know which are suitable for my children and which ones my husband and I might go to.
How old are your children?
5 and 7. What about The Mystery of Muldoon?
That's aimed at 5 to 10-year-olds.
So if I take my children, I can expect them to enjoy it more than I do.
I think so. If you'd like something for yourself and your husband and leave your children with a babysitter, you might like to see Fire and Flood. It's about events that really happened in Stretton 200 years ago, and children might find it rather frightening.
Oh, thanks for the warning. And finally, what about Silly Sailor?
That's a comedy, and it's for young and old. In fact, it won an award in the Stretton Drama Festival a couple of months ago.
OK. Well, goodbye and thanks for all the information. I'm looking forward to the festival.
Goodbye.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 2. Section 2. You will hear a guide at an art museum talking to a group of visitors. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 16. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 16.
Good morning and welcome to the museum, one with a remarkable range of exhibits which I'm sure you'll enjoy. My name's Greg and I'll tell you about the various collections as we go around. But before we go, let me just give you a taste of what we have here. Well, for one thing, we have a fine collection of 20th and 21st century paintings, many by very well-known artists. I'm sure you'll recognize several of the paintings. This is the gallery that attracts the largest number of visitors, so it's best to go in early in the day before the crowds arrive. Then there are the 19th century paintings. The museum was opened in the middle of that century, and several of the artists each donated one work to get the museum started, as it were. So they're of special interest to us. We feel closer to them than to other works. The sculpture gallery has a number of fine exhibits, but I'm afraid it's currently closed for refurbishment. You'll need to come back next year to see it properly, but a number of the sculptures have been moved to other parts of the museum. Around the World is a temporary exhibition. You've probably seen something about it on TV or in the newspapers. It's created a great deal of interest because it presents objects from every continent and many countries and provides information about their social context, why they were made, who for, and so on. Then there's the collection of coins. This is what you might call a focused specialist collection because all the coins come from this country and were produced between 2000 and 1,000 years ago. And many of them were discovered by ordinary people digging their gardens and donated to the museum. All our porcelain and glass was left to the museum by its founder when he died in 1878, and in the terms of his will, we're not allowed to add anything to that collection. He believed it was perfect in itself, and we don't see any reason to disagree.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 17 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 17 to 20.
Okay, that was something about the collections, and now here's some more practical information, in case you need it. Most of the museum facilities are downstairs in the basement, so you go down the stairs here. When you reach the bottom of the stairs, you'll find yourself in a sitting area with comfortable chairs and sofas where you can have a rest before continuing your exploration of the museum. We have a very good restaurant which serves excellent food all day in a relaxing atmosphere. To reach it, when you get to the bottom of the stairs, go straight ahead to the far side of the sitting area, then turn right into the corridor. You'll see the door of the restaurant facing you. If you just want a snack or if you'd like to eat somewhere with facilities for children, we also have a cafe. When you reach the bottom of the stairs, you'll need to go straight ahead, turn right into the corridor, and the cafe is immediately on the right. And talking about children, there are baby changing facilities downstairs. Cross the sitting area, continue straight ahead along the corridor on the left, and you and your baby will find the facilities on the left-hand side. The cloakroom, where you should leave coats, umbrellas, and any large bags, is on the left-hand side of the sitting area. It's through the last door before you come to the corridor. There are toilets on every floor, but in the basement, they're the first rooms on the left when you get down there. Okay. Now, if you've got anything to leave in the cloakroom, please do that now, and then we'll start our tour.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Now turn to section 3. Section 3. You will hear a student called Joanna talking to her new supervisor about some research she has done on psychology and music. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26.
Hi, Joanna. Good to meet you. Now, before we discuss your new research project, I'd like to hear something about the psychology study you did last year for your master's degree. So, how did you choose your subjects for that?
Well, I had 6 subjects, all professional musicians and all female. 3 were violinists, and there was also a cello player and a pianist and a flute player. They were all very highly regarded in the music world, and they'd done quite extensive tours in different continents, and quite a few had won prizes and competitions as well.
And they were quite young, weren't they?
Yes, between 25 and 29. The mean was 27.8. I wasn't specifically looking for artists who'd produced recordings, but this is something that's just taken for granted these days, and they all had.
Right. Now, you collected your data through telephone interviews, didn't you?
Yes. I realised if I was going to interview leading musicians, it'd only be possible over the phone because they're so busy. I recorded them using a telephone recording adapter. I'd been worried about the quality, but it worked out all right. I managed at least a 30-minute interview with each subject, sometimes longer.
Did doing it on the phone make it more stressful?
I'd thought it might. It was all quite informal, though, and in fact they seemed very keen to talk. And I don't think using the phone meant I got less rich data. Rather the opposite, in fact.
Interesting. And you were looking at how performers dress for concert performances?
That's right. My research investigated the way players see their role as a musician and how this is linked to the type of clothing they decide to wear. But that focus didn't emerge immediately. When I started, I was more interested in trying to investigate the impact of what was worn on those listening, and also whether someone like a violinist might adopt a different style of clothing from, say, someone playing the flute or the trumpet.
It's interesting that the choice of dress is up to the individual, isn't it?
Yes, you'd expect there to be rules about it in orchestras, but that's quite rare.
Before you hear the rest of the discussion, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
You only had women performers in your study. Was that because male musicians are less worried about fashion?
I think a lot of the men are very much influenced by fashion, but in social terms, the choices they have are more limited. They'd really upset audiences if they strayed away from quite narrow boundaries.
Now, popular music has quite different expectations. Did you read Mike Frost's article about the dress of women performers in popular music?
No.
Well, he points out that a lot of female singers and musicians in popular music tend to dress down in performances and wear less feminine clothes, like jeans instead of skirts. And he suggests this is because otherwise they'd just be discounted as trivial.
But you could argue they're just wearing what's practical. I mean, a pop music concert is usually a pretty energetic affair.
Yes, he doesn't make that point, but I think you're probably right. I was interested by the effect of the audience at a musical performance when it came to the choice of dress.
The subjects I interviewed felt this was really important. It's all to do with what we understand by performance as a public event. They believed the audience had certain expectations, and it was up to them as performers to fulfill these expectations, to show a kind of esteem.
They weren't afraid of looking as if they'd made an effort to look good.
I think in the past, the audience would have had those expectations of one another too, but that's not really the case now. Not in the UK, anyway.
No.
And I also got interested in what sports scientists are doing too with regard to clothing.
Musicians are quite vulnerable physically, aren't they? Because the movements they carry out are very intensive and repetitive. So I'd imagine some features of sports clothing could safeguard the players from the potentially dangerous effects of this sort of thing.
Yes, but musicians don't really consider it. They avoid clothing that obviously restricts their movements, but that's as far as they go.
Anyway, coming back to your own research, do you have any idea where you're going from here?
I was thinking of doing a study using an audience, including...
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Section 4. You will hear part of a lecture about a way of reducing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
As we saw in the last lecture, a major cause of climate change is the rapid rise in the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over the last century. If we could reduce the amount of CO2, perhaps the rate of climate change could also be slowed down. One potential method involves enhancing the role of the soil that plants grow in with regard to absorbing CO2. Ratan Lal, a soil scientist from Ohio State University in the USA, claims that the world's agricultural soils could potentially absorb 13% of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the equivalent of the amount released in the last 30 years. And research is going on into how this might be achieved. Lal first came to the idea that soil might be valuable in this way, not through an interest in climate change, but rather out of concern for the land itself and the people dependent on it. Carbon-rich soil is dark, crumbly and fertile, and retains some water. But erosion can occur if soil is dry, which is a likely effect if it contains inadequate amounts of carbon. Erosion is of course bad for people trying to grow crops or breed animals on that terrain. In the 1970s and 80s, Lal was studying soils in Africa so devoid of organic matter that the ground had become extremely hard, like cement. There he met a pioneer in the study of global warming, who suggested that carbon from the soil had moved into the atmosphere. This is now looking increasingly likely. Let me explain. For millions of years, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere have been regulated, in part, by a natural partnership between plants and microbes, tiny organisms in the soil. Plants absorb CO2 from the air and transform it into sugars and other carbon-based substances. While a proportion of these carbon products remain in the plant, some transfer from the roots to fungi and soil microbes, which store the carbon in the soil. The invention of agriculture some 10,000 years ago disrupted these ancient soil-building processes and led to the loss of carbon from the soil. When humans started draining the natural topsoil and ploughing it up for planting, they exposed the buried carbon to oxygen. This created carbon dioxide and released it into the air. And in some places, grazing by domesticated animals has removed all vegetation, releasing carbon into the air. Tons of carbon have been stripped from the world's soils, where it's needed, and pumped into the atmosphere. So, what can be done? Researchers are now coming up with evidence that even modest changes to farming can significantly help to reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. Some growers have already started using an approach known as regenerative agriculture. This aims to boost the fertility of soil and keep it moist through established practices. These include keeping fields planted all year round and increasing the variety of plants being grown. Strategies like these can significantly increase the amount of carbon stored in the soil, so agricultural researchers are now building a case for their use in combating climate change. One American investigation into the potential for storing CO2 on agricultural lands is taking place in California. Soil scientist Wendy Silver of the University of California, Berkeley, is conducting a first-of-its-kind study on a large cattle farm in the state. She and her students are testing the effects on carbon storage of the compost that is created from waste, both agricultural, including manure and corn stalks, and waste produced in gardens, such as leaves, branches, and lawn trimmings. In Australia, soil ecologist Christine Jones is testing another promising soil enrichment strategy. Jones and 12 farmers are working to build up soil carbon by cultivating grasses that stay green all year round. Like composting, the approach has already been proved experimentally. Jones now hopes to show that it can be applied on working farms and that the resulting carbon capture can be accurately measured. It's hoped in the future that projects such as these will demonstrate the role that farmers and other land managers can play in reducing the harmful effects of greenhouse gases. For example, in countries like the United States, where most farming operations use large applications of fertilizer, changing such long-standing habits will require a change of system. Ratan Lal argues that farmers should receive payment, not just for the corn or beef they produce, but also for the carbon they can store in their soil. Another study being carried out.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of the listening test. You now have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Please stop writing and wait for your question booklet to be.
Alright, well done everyone, and thanks. So আমরা so far 2টা টেস্ট কমপ্লিট করছি IELTS লিসেনিং এর, and আমাদের প্র্যাকটিস সেশনের এটাই সমাপ্তি for now. And the fact is, I hope that you all did really very well, and the fact is এই যে আপনারা এতগুলো প্র্যাকটিস করছেন, এতটুকু করার ট্রাই করছেন, এই যে যাবতীয় যে বিষয়গুলো, সেটা আপনার যে অনুশীলনের যে বিষয়গুলো সেটাকে আরো অনেক বেশি স্ট্রং করবে। আপনার যে নলেজটা অ্যান্ড আপনার যে স্কিলটা সেটাকে আরো অনেক বেশি স্ট্রং করবে। অ্যান্ড হোপফুলি আপনারা মোটামুটি যতগুলো লেকচার অ্যান্ড যতগুলো লেসনস আমরা কমপ্লিট করছি সকলগুলোই খুব ভালোভাবে শেষ করছেন অ্যান্ড বুঝে বুঝে বিষয়গুলো করার ট্রাই করছেন। সো এখন এই মুহূর্তে আপনারা যেটা করবেন সেটা হচ্ছে নাও চেক ইউর অ্যান্সার্স। তখন যে আপনারা নোট ডাউন করলেন অ্যান্সারগুলো সেগুলো এই অ্যান্সার শিটের সাথে মিলিয়ে নেন। অ্যান্ড এটার জন্য আপনাকে আমি 2 মিনিট সময় দিচ্ছি আপনাদের। এই 2 মিনিটে আপনাদের কতগুলো সঠিক হয়েছে আর কতগুলো ভুল হয়েছে সেটা মিলিয়ে নেন। তো আশা করছি এতক্ষণে আপনারা আপনাদের অ্যান্সারগুলো মিলিয়ে নিয়েছেন অ্যান্ড নোট ডাউন করছেন যে কতগুলো কারেক্ট হয়েছে। সো এখন এই যতগুলো কারেক্ট হয়েছে এই সংখ্যার উপর ভিত্তি করে আপনারা আপনাদের ব্যান্ড যে স্কোরটা সেটা নির্ধারণ করার ট্রাই করেন অ্যান্ড প্লিজ রাইট ইট ইন দি কমেন্ট বক্স সো দ্যাট we can understand your progress and congratulations. At least আপনারা ট্রাই করছেন অ্যান্ড আস্তে আস্তে বিষয়টা আরো অনেক বেশি ইজি হবে। একটা কথা না বললেই নয় যে আপনারা কে কতটা মেধাবী, কে কতটা ট্যালেন্টেড, কে কতটা অনেক এক্সট্রা অর্ডিনারি বিষয়গুলোর অধিকারী, এসব আসলে কোনোটাই ফ্যাক্ট না। যেটা ফ্যাক্ট সেটা হচ্ছে আপনার ধৈর্য, আপনার পরিশ্রম, আপনি কতটা ইন্ডাস্ট্রিয়াস সেটার উপর বেসিস করবে আপনার মানে আপনার সাকসেস। সো বিষয়টা এরকম না যে আপনাকে অনেক বেশি ট্যালেন্টেড হতে হবে, আপনাকে অনেক বেশি এক্সট্রাঅর্ডিনারি হতে হবে আইএলটিএস ভালো করার জন্য। জাস্ট প্র্যাকটিস অ্যাজ মাচ অ্যাজ ইউ ক্যান। অ্যান্ড আমাদের যে বিগত লেকচারগুলো আছে সেই লেকচারগুলোতে দেওয়া যাবতীয় টিপস অ্যান্ড ট্রিক্স অ্যান্ড অল গাইডলাইন্স এই বিষয়গুলো ফলো করে আরও অনেক বেশি প্র্যাকটিস করার ট্রাই করেন কেমব্রিজ আইএলটিএস বই থেকে। অ্যান্ড আমরাও যতটা পারি আমাদের পরবর্তী বিভিন্ন সেশনে আরও কিছু কথা বলার ট্রাই করব এই আইএলটিএস লিসেনিং নিয়ে। নাও দ্যাটস দ্য এন্ড অফ আওয়ার আইএলটিএস লিসেনিং। সো আমরা মোটামুটি সবগুলো লেকচার অ্যান্ড সবগুলো লেসনস কমপ্লিট করে ফেলছি আইএলটিএস লিসেনিংয়ের। অ্যান্ড আপনারাও আশা করি আমার সাথে সাথে সকল বিষয়গুলোই খুব ভালোভাবে আয়ত্ত করছেন। অ্যান্ড আমরা পরবর্তী সপ্তাহ থেকে দেখবো হচ্ছে আইএলটিএস রিডিং এর সবগুলো লেকচার। So the fact is, প্র্যাকটিস অ্যাজ মাচ অ্যাজ পসিবল। অনুশীলনের কোনো বিকল্প নেই। আপনি কতটা ট্যালেন্টেড, আপনি কতটা এক্সট্রাঅর্ডিনারি, এসব দিন শেষে ম্যাটার করবে না। আপনি কতটা, আপনার প্রোগ্রেস, আপনি কতটা আগাইতেছেন সেটাই কিন্তু ম্যাটার করবে। অ্যান্ড দ্য ফ্যাক্ট ইজ, আপনার আপনি আপনার কোনো ফ্রেন্ড বা আপনার ক্লাসমেট, ওদের সাথে আপনি আপনাকে কম্পেয়ার করবেন না। আপনি কম্পেয়ার করবেন আপনার নিজের সাথে, যে আপনি এই কোর্সটা শুরু করার পূর্বে আপনার কতটা প্রোগ্রেস ছিল, আপনি কতটা মানে ভালো করতেছিলেন, কতটা পারতেন। অ্যান্ড নাও আপনি এত কিছু শিখার পরে আপনি কতটা আগাইছেন। ওই আপনার নিজের যে আগের যে আপনি আপনার যে আগের যে অবস্থা, আপনার যে আগের যে বিষয়, আপনার যে আগের যে পজিশন, এটার সাথে আপনার বর্তমান নলেজের কম্পেয়ার করবেন। আপনার ক্লাসমেট বা আপনার ফ্রেন্ডের সাথে কম্পেয়ার করবেন না। তাহলেই আপনার রিয়েল প্রোগ্রেসটা আপনি বুঝতে পারবেন। থ্যাংক ইউ এভরিওয়ান অ্যান্ড বেস্ট অফ লাক। এখন শুধু প্র্যাকটিস, প্র্যাকটিস অ্যান্ড প্র্যাকটিসের সময়। অ্যান্ড if you face any problem, please feel free to contact with me. And that is my WhatsApp number and email. সো যদি কোনো প্রকার সমস্যা ফিল করেন, সমস্যা ফেস করেন, যে কোনো সমস্যা ফেস করেন যে কোনো লেসন বা যে কোনো প্রকার টপিকে, দেন আমাকে অবশ্যই হোয়াটসঅ্যাপ বা ইমেল করতে দ্বিধাবোধ করবেন না। সো see you everyone and best of luck. খোদা হাফেজ।